Let's dive right in. Foreign Minister Qureshi, obviously face-to-face meetings, in-person interactions, these are all key aspects of diplomacy, traveling, being on site. Of course, the pandemic has made all these somewhat difficult. What are the challenges these days to conducting diplomacy? What are the challenges to conducting diplomacy in times of a pandemic?
Well, thank you. Let me begin by thanking the TRT Forum for this invitation to be on the panel for this discussion. I am glad to know that in the last 5 years, you have covered considerable ground, and this forum has become a very well-known, well-respected forum. I'm happy to share this platform with the Foreign Minister of Turkey and the Foreign Minister of Finland, who are well-known friends. This pandemic, which is the topic and very well chosen, because of over 60 million people around the globe having been affected and having lost 1.4 million lives, is perhaps the right topic, and it was the need of the hour. Pakistan, like the rest of the world, despite the new foreign policy challenges, has been dealing with this challenge. And I would say rather well, in the sense that we were able to contain it to a large extent. We are going through our second wave, which is a bit of a concern because the numbers are rising. In the last 24 hours, we've had 66 new deaths in the country. But on the whole, we managed the crisis reasonably well so far. Obviously, the pandemic has had an impact on how we conduct foreign policy. The fact that here, through this forum, 3 foreign ministers are engaging with you and are discussing regional, international issues, issues of global nature, issues of the challenge of the pandemic, its impact on human lives, its impact on international economy, the challenge of the growing challenge of climate change, which we are about to face, or we are facing, and will be facing, immediately after we have dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. So such interactions, this virtual connection is useful. But when we talk of the new instruments for foreign policy and our new approach, we also have to see the environment that we are working in. Before the pandemic hit us, one could easily see a retreat in globalization. The tendency of protectionism was on the rise. One could see multilateralism on the decline. And as the Foreign Minister of Turkey just mentioned, it is a challenge that we need to deal with. And, we are supporters of multilateralism. We saw and we are seeing an increasing trend in foreign policy, unilateral trends. And these unilateral trends, in an environment where there's growing competition, where there's confrontation and divisions on the rise, can be very destabilizing. It can undermine global stability, security, peace. We are seeing a resurgence of old conflicts. For example, here in this region in South Asia, the Kashmir dispute is one of the oldest on the agenda of the Security Council. But we have seen a new resurgence, a new rise in concerns in Jammu and Kashmir, the atrocities being committed, the fundamental rights being suspended, the kind of military siege that, over 8 million people are in, living in an open prison. These are the new challenges we are seeing, and we are seeing some new rivalries on the rise. And foreign policy during the pandemic and post pandemic will have to, many of us will have to deal with them. For example, this rising tension between China and the US. Now, Pakistan has had a very old relationship with the United States. We also opened the doors for the U.S. For the U.S. To Beijing and helped develop this new understanding earlier on. But we see a new rising tension, and we have
Right.
an old ally in the U.S. and a strategic ally in China. So how do we maintain this balance, this very delicate balance? Then we see, within Europe, the Foreign Minister of Turkey mentioned Europe, how Europe today is facing new challenges, and how Europe is dealing with those challenges. The challenge of immigration, for example, and divisions within Europe. And you see Brexit, and you see a very important country departing from the European Union. So the question is, international stability is under threat, and how we have to see that we can collectively promote multilateralism and stability within our region and obviously
Right.
beyond our region. One thing
And
that has become very clear today, and that is
indeed, Foreign Minister, if I may just
sure.
jump in, because you have given us quite a few challenges, quite a wonderful, comprehensive outlook on what the challenges are of conducting diplomacy in a time of pandemic. I want to build upon this and come back to you in just a moment, adjusting to the new realities, as of course are all other countries. Foreign Minister Qureshi, it's already been said that multilateralism and international cooperation are needed more than ever. After all, this pandemic requires a global response rather than a unilateral one. And Foreign Minister Choujol already pointed out in his opening remarks that essentially no country is safe until all countries are. But what we're seeing in effect are responses are largely universal, aren't they not? Some might even say that we are seeing a new nationalism taking hold, and your preliminary remarks indicated that as well. Would you agree that the pandemic has not fostered the kind of cooperation that is needed, but rather fostered and promoted and brought upon a new level of nationalism?
Well, to begin with, let me comment that I think the world was not prepared for this challenge. As I said, we were gradually transiting towards, protectionism from globalization. Multilateralism was receding, and you saw unilateralism on the rise, and it has had an impact. It has had an impact on how states have responded to different challenges. What was required for this challenge to be dealt effectively was a multilateral, holistic, cooperative approach. But what you saw was a initial knee-jerk reaction, and every country fending for itself, sealing borders, trying to protect their people, their economies, not realizing, as for Mr. Visto said, that nobody is safe till everyone is safe. That realization had not sunk in. Gradually, this pandemic has now made us realize that we are a different world. We are an interconnected world, a world which has more of interdependence today than ever before. Generations living before us were dealing with a different situation. Today, if there is a contraction in the economy of Europe or of the United States, I, sitting in Pakistan, am directly affected. My exports are affected. My remittances are affected when 50% of my foreign exchange earnings are dependent on remittances. So it's a different world that we are dealing with, and that is why we need to change our approach and make it multilateral, cooperative, and that is why Pakistan undertook we made three suggestions, and we have said, since it's a global challenge, it requires a global response. Many countries, developing countries, are at a disadvantage. They need help. They have limited fiscal space. That is why the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan, launched an initiative called the Global Initiative for Debt Relief, asking the world to help the developing world, because if the developing world goes under, willy nilly, you will get affected. So help help them, give them the fiscal space so that they can invest in their fragile health sectors, and they can protect lives. One. The other thing that we have been advocating is, let's drop the commercial approach to the COVID-19 vaccine. Many countries are doing research, but what we need is more of sharing. For example, we need more, sharing of health data, medical expertise, life saving protective gear. Initially, everybody was for themselves, and countries were desperate for ventilators, couldn't buy ventilators because they were not available. Even they were willing to pay, but they were not available. That is why cooperation in scientific research is important, and that is why Pakistan has suggested that we need this vaccine for greater public good. Make it affordable, make it accessible for everyone. And finally, let's
Right.
not get into stigmatization. When we get into stigmatization, then we lose that cooperative approach. For example, there were initially, in the initial period, there was finger pointing. The Chinese virus. Then there was some finger pointing, calling Muslims as super spreaders of this virus. These were things that we need to avoid, and have a more cooperative approach to deal with this challenge.
Thank you so much for laying out the Pakistani strategies and approach to this pandemic, and how to overcome battling nationalism and fostering international corporations in time like these, more than ever needed, of the future, the presence and of the future, of course. Do you, as a seasoned foreign minister and diplomat, do you see an upside to the current situation? Of course, the pandemic has affected us all profoundly, mostly negatively, but do you see an upside to this current situation? Has the pandemic perhaps the power to bring countries with diplomatic problems together in times like these?
Certainly, yes, there is a great possibility. But let me also share with you some of my thoughts. Pandemic also highlighted one thing: the limitation of international institutions. For example, when we needed WHO the most, some of us were, withdrawing from WHO, and sort of not cooperating. When the Secretary General of the United Nations calls for a immediate ceasefire in different conflict zones of the world and deal with this pandemic, nobody pays heed to his call. That was another challenge. And in our region, in South Asia, across the line of control on the Indian occupied side of Kashmir, we see a new intensification of ceasefire violations. If you compare the violations that took place in 2019 and see the increased intensification of violations in 2020 during the pandemic, you see that they went the opposite way. They paid no heed to what the Secretary General was saying. Now, obviously, there is another realization that the pandemic, well, these things were simmering. I'm not saying they've just born out of the pandemic, they were simmering, but the pandemic hastened the process, and we are dealing with new challenges. For example, I feel intolerance is on the rise. And you see Islamophobia, xenophobia, very much there, and we have to deal with that. We see discrimination and discriminatory policies being pursued by many states. I'll give you a very good example of here again, of my neighbor in the East, India. They have a population of 180 million Muslims, right? They're a minority, but they're a sizable number, 180 million. But what do? They bring in new legislation, Citizen Amendment Act, discriminatory in nature for a large minority living within, Muslim minority living within India. We see racism on the rise, and you saw what happened in the US prior to the presidential election, and how that gave rise to
Right.
a new movement, Black Lives Matter. And nationalism, you see, protectionism, immigration, how economic immigrants have been dealt with very harshly, I must say, very harshly, in a very callous manner. And you've seen people dying, and starving and suffering. These need to be addressed. Can I also make one last point, and that is, during the pandemic, one saw, you talked of geopolitical, changes and conflicts. Here again, unfortunately, some in our region, instead of cooperation, went the other way and took advantage of international diversion to, sort of increase their stranglehold on disputed territories like Jammu and Kashmir. You saw new restrictions imposed. You saw a new communication blockade over there. You saw how fundamental rights were just suspended and done away with, and you saw new measures announced which were against international law. Demographic changes being
Right.
sort of forced on people, violating the Fourth Geneva Convention, international law, the UN Charter. So where the world required more cooperation, there were tendencies of taking advantage of a situation in a very inhumane, a very inhumane approach was adopted. Now, these are the new realities that we have to deal with in foreign policy and find a way. What's the way forward? Obviously, interstate diplomacy is the way forward. Obviously, dialogue is the way forward, and Pakistan has been advocating it. For example, when the world was not paying attention to Pakistan, we were saying there is no military solution to Afghanistan, and only a negotiated political settlement is required. And today, the world has finally converged to that point. Now, we are saying, please do not ignore South Asia. There are two nuclear states,
Right.
confronting each other. And if you do not pay heed, if you do not pay attention to this simmering problem, this dispute, then there could be a problem, and the world will get sucked in. Even if you don't want to, you want to stay away, you don't want to take sides, but you will have to. You will have to jump in unless and until
Right.
you intervene in time through dialogue, through diplomacy, and resolve the issue.
Certainly a region that we ignore at our own peril for sure. But